The Crown is an award-winning show. It's loved by many, it's watched by millions. It does, though, exist as a work of fiction. It's not pure fact. We do all know this, but here, for the record, are some of the biggest inaccuracies in this season of The Crown. So firstly, one of the big themes of the opening episodes of this season of The Crown is the 50th birthday party that Charles threw for Camilla. And this was a big event at the time. However, The Crown depicted it very differently to reality. They had this whole framing that Diana was out there on holiday with the Alfayeds, trying to upstage Camilla and succeeding in kind of knocking her off the front pages, despite Charles's best efforts to get the Queen to come along to the party. And, you know, he's shown giving this big rousing speech in support of Camilla. Now, in reality, they were miles off being at the point where the Queen was going to endorse their relationship. A long, long, long way off. But also, more to the point, at the time, the papers were all absolutely desperate to get a picture of Charles and Camilla together. And there was such a clamour for that the Mirror actually kind of mocked up a kind of photoshopped job after the event of Charles and Camilla next to each other, but they refused to pose together. Charles would not be photographed side by side with Camilla to demonstrate the strength of the relationship in public. Now, the fact that he wasn't willing to do that tells you everything you need to know about the Crown's narrative that Charles was fighting a PR war to try to get as much publicity for this birthday party as possible as a means of using it to secure Camilla's legitimacy. That was not the framing at the time. And if it had been, you've got to imagine that Charles and Camilla would have simply posed for the cameras together, and that would have got Charles what he wanted. Second up, the show depicts this kind of revenge photo shoot where Charles stages a picture at Balmoral, which is the royal family's Scottish country retreat, with William and Harry, and he enlists the help of this kind of slightly eccentric local Scottish photographer with a very old-fashioned camera, and it's all kind of very quaint. In reality, that's not how that photo shoot happened. It's a real photo shoot. Those pictures exist. The real ones look pretty similar to the ones in The Crown. However, it was what you would call a pool photo shoot, where several photographers were actually brought to Balmoral to take pictures of the royal family on their summer vacation, and they were then distributed throughout the media. It was something that happened on a kind of semi-regular basis. At the time, less so today, but back then it wasn't necessarily unusual to have photographers invited up to Balmoral to photograph the royal family in Scotland. So this framing that it was a revenge photo shoot is slightly harder to justify. The Mohammed Al Fayed plotline in this season of The Crown is perhaps one of the most striking and extraordinary parts of it, and it is quite relentlessly negative about the Al Fayeds. There are numerous aspects to this. One of the key ones for me was just how frequently Mohammed Al Fayed is shown pushing his son Dodi to have the relationship with Diana, specifically for selfish reasons. For example, that he wanted British citizenship, and he also offers this carrot that Dodi can be a partner in the company and the family business if he does it. There are innumerable problems with this. One, of course, is that we know that Dodi probably didn't have the kind of business acumen and heft to perform that role. But also, Mohammed Al Fayed told people at the time how much he loved his son and how he just wanted Dodi to be happy, but also specifically, he actually tried to kill the story about their relationship. Piers Morgan, who was a Fleet Street editor at the time, got a set of pictures of Diana and Dodi on Mohammed Al Fayed's yacht, the Jonnacle. In the show, it's depicted that Mohammed Al Fayed called the paparazzi to take those pictures. Piers Morgan says that it wasn't Mohammed Al Fayed, it was actually Diana, and that when he rang Mohammed Al Fayed to try to confirm the story, Al Fayed actually told him it was false. It was only when Piers Morgan said, "We don't care, we're publishing it anyway because we've got the truth," that Mohammed finally acknowledged the relationship was real and said he just wanted his son to be happy. I've spoken to people who were friends with Mohammed Al Fayed who said he wanted the best for his son. No doubt there is some kernel of truth to the suggestion that Mohammed Al Fayed, he was a clever guy. Some people said he was capable of being a bit of a schemer, but the one-sidedness of the Crown's portrayal of him as being uniformly motivated by self-interest just doesn't stand up in the face of what people who knew him have said. Another very emotive scene from The Crown has Diana and Dodi going into Monte Carlo from their holiday and being chased through the streets by photographers And they kind of seek refuge in a jewelry shop where Dodi asks her, "What would you like?" And Diana picks a ring from a range called, in French, "Tell Me Yes." Right. So this was a real range, and there was a real ring from the Tell Me Yes range. And it was a real issue that Mohammed Al Fayed raised repeatedly after they'd already died, as part of a kind of drive that he went on to promote the idea that a marriage was in the offing. Now, the received wisdom is that that is not actually true. It was investigated by the police. The police found no evidence that they were engaged or that they were going to get engaged or that a marriage was on the cards. But more to the point, they never got chased through the streets. They never, in that way, at that time, in that place, never took refuge in that jewelry shop. The ring was actually picked out by a staff member of Dodi's. And he did buy it. It cost him like £11,500, I think, but it wasn't Diana's choice. And I think anyone who takes even a cursory glance at the ring will know that it is not the kind of ring that Diana would be given as an engagement ring. It just doesn't look anything like it, and it's been described as a bit vulgar and garish, which I think, in all honesty, is probably fair. Now, again, the show depicts Dodi actually asking Diana to marry him, which there is no suggestion that that ever happened in any kind of official format. The police never found any evidence that was the case. Now, this, again, it kind of goes back to the version of events that Mohammed Al Fayed was pushing in the days and months and years after the death. But it's completely unsupported by the testimonies of her friends. And I actually once interviewed her private secretary, her most senior staff member at the time, a man called Michael Gibbons, who told me that in his view, the relationship with Dodi was a bit of fun over the summer and that she never intended to marry him. Now, that is an element of how the Crown characterizes it. They don't show Diana wanting a marriage with Dodi. I think what they've done in this scene in reality is basically use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And they're just trying to make the point that it was a one-way relationship, that Diana was about to bail out sort of once the summer ended and return to her normal life, and that it was Dodi who wanted to kind of pull her in. Needless to say, there is absolutely no suggestion that he ever did this proposal. The actual scene itself has Diana say, no, 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 and then make him call Mohammed Al Fayed and kind of finally have it out with his father and tell him to stop, meddling and intervening, which again, almost certainly never happened. There are a large number of very emotive scenes in this season. One of them has Charles go to see Diana's body after the crash has happened, and he's shown kind of wailing and sobbing as he does this. Now, Charles did go and see Diana. He actually went with her sisters, and it was said that he kind of came out of that incredibly emotional experience with red eyes. So clearly he was overcome with emotion, and I'm sure there was some crying. But the particularly kind of emphatic kind of weeping that is shown in The Crown is very much, I think, the show's attempt to demonstrate how big a moment this was for Charles, rather than a kind of accurate take on what really happened. Charles is also shown being one of the driving forces behind the decision to give Diana a kind of really big state funeral with all the royal kind of pomp and pageantry that a royal family member with HRH status would have had, which Diana didn't have at the time. Her HRH had been removed. The reality is the Queen was probably, in reality, much more the driving force behind all of that decision-making than Charles was. I'm sure he had his views on it, and he may well have agreed with his mother, but the show presents it as the Queen wavering and being slightly pushed into it by Charles. That does not seem to match the reality of what really took place. Another extraordinary scene in The Crown has William actually go missing for 14 hours. He kind of goes off for a walk in Balmoral around the estate without telling anybody, causing significant concern and alarm about where he'd gone, search parties, the whole shebang. In reality, William did go for a long walk at some point, but the framing that he was kind of missing for 14 hours, nobody knew where he was, and there were kind of concerns about whether he would come back at all. That is probably over-egging the pudding. It's not complete fiction, but it is an exaggeration, and it's probably just another one of those examples where fiction has to kind of use a sledgehammer to crack a nut in order to, I suppose, keep us entertained.